We've really hit summertime now. Schools are out, vacations planned, the dogs are boarded, the sunscreen is packed. What a joyful break from the also good and joyful routines and classes and lessons that structure and order the days of the rest of our lives. One thing, however, that I hear in these months when we break these routines that order our life for special summer experiences, what I hear from church folk when I run into them at Kroger or shake my hand at the end of the worship services, they'll say, now we're not going to be here next week, or you're not going to see us much this summer because we'll be at the lake. Now, I don't blame you for going to the lake in the summer, but I thought it would be fun to play on this summertime tradition so that this summer, whether you have actually physically gone to a lake or you're in worship on Sunday, we can say that we are all spending summer at the lake. So over these weeks of June, July, and August, we're going to be exploring stories with Jesus and his followers. And while I hope this is a fun series, it's also intended to be revelatory about who we discover Jesus to be, who we discover God to be, as we come to be followers of the Lord who we meet on the lake. Today we start at the Sea of Galilee, which Luke in our passage calls the Sea of Gennesaret, but it's the same place. The Sea of Galilee is 13 miles long, and it's 8 miles wide. That means it's 64 square miles. Just as a frame of reference, a Smith Mountain Lake is 32 square miles. So the Sea of Galilee is about twice as large as Smith Mountain Lake. The lake is 600 feet below sea level, which leads to certain weather systems where in the summer especially, winds can pick up very suddenly and storms spring up out of nowhere. You'll hear more about those in future weeks. An ancient historian, Josephus, describes the water of the Sea of Galilee as sweet and wonderful to drink, and that around the lake, the soils are rich, and there's much pasture land. The Sea of Galilee is filled with a variety of kinds of fish and professional fishermen who make their living upon these waters. One of those fishermen is named Simon. He works with two brothers, James and John, in a professional fishing expedition, according to Luke. And now, you're going to hear a lot about ancient modes of fishing over the course of this summer while we're at the lake. But today in particular, I think that the kind of net, the kind of fishing that Simon, James, and John do, knowing more about that style of fishing, tells us a great deal about what God is revealing to us in this story today. Peter, James, and John are using what's known as a trammel net. A trammel net is 3 layers of net thick, so we assume they're using that because Luke says they were cleaning their nets, plural. And so the trammel net has 3 layers to it. Trammel nets are about 100 feet long, and you can link them together up to 100 yards in length. And they go out in the water, into the deeper water, and they're dropped in the water parallel to the shore. They're weighed down with weights on the bottom, and you attach gourds on the top so that they float. You stretch them between 2 boats. And then the fishermen get between the shoreline and the net, and they do this at night when the fish can't see the nets, and they beat the water with their oars, scaring and startling the fish. They try to flee from the sound, from the noise, and they end up swimming into the nets. You then haul those nets in, and you have your catch of fish. You extract them for your catch. So on this particular morning, Simon, James, and John have been out all night fishing this way, beating their oars on the water in hopes of collecting a big catch, but we find out that they have caught nothing. And they are cleaning 100 yards of deep fishing net in the morning when Jesus comes along. He asks to borrow Simon's boat so that he can get out into the water to teach the crowds that are following him. And when he finishes teaching, he invites Simon into the boat and says, let's put out for a catch. Can you imagine? You've been out all night. You've caught nothing. You've been beating your oars on the water. You're exhausted. You just finished cleaning 100 yards of net. And now Jesus says, put this out in the water. You, Simon, you're a serious fisherman. You grew up on these waters. You know what you're doing. But for some reason, Simon obeys the command, and he does it. Now, you heard what happens. After the catch that they bring in almost swamps the boat, Simon falls on his face before Jesus and responds like the prophets of old when they would encounter God's presence. "Go away from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man." Jesus replies and he says, "Do not be afraid. From now on, you will be catching people." New Testament scholar Luke Timothy Johnson wants to make very clear what's happening in this moment to show the nuance in the Greek text. He translates this differently to say, "Now you will be one who nets people." Simon will be one who draws people into the way of Jesus. He will be one who catches the stray, the lonely, the fearful. He will use the net of grace to draw in the very church itself. I love this image of being one who catches others, who creates a net in which people can find safety and hope. Simon has spent his life mending his net, cleaning his net, casting his net, stretching his net, tending his net. He knows a lot about nets, when and where they need to be placed in order to catch what needs to be caught. Jesus calls him to be one who catches people. Later, Jesus changes Simon's name to Peter, right, which means the rock. And Jesus says, "On this rock, I will build my church." But what tool does Simon Peter have to build the church? Not a hammer and nails, but a net. He isn't using slogans or cliches or baiting people with unrealistic promises. He's going to be one who catches people, not catches them like the dog catcher trying to get after the stray canine, no, but the one who drops the net out in the deep water to catch those who are helpless, who are lost, who are hurt, who are angry, who are longing for something. He will be there to net them. I'm not sure this is an image that I have ever considered before. I don't know if you have, but I hadn't. I haven't thought of the church as being a community who catches people. Now, there are many times I think the church has confused our ends and pursuit of influence or relevance. The church has cozied up to state power. As early as the 4th century with Constantine and the Roman Empire, you see the same way the church is embedded with state power in the Reformation, in the various national churches of the nations of Europe. And even here, some of you will remember where going to church was how you were to combat godless communism. Your patriotic duty was to be a practicing Christian to bring down the Soviet Union. And even more recently, we hear the invocation of the Prince of Peace as a reason to support violent nationalistic uprisings. We've seen the church try to cozy itself up and become a self-help community, a psychological community that promises you a more fulfilling and whole inner life of contentment. We've seen the church try to become a place to learn about financial successful management through the prosperity gospel, confusing the invisible hand that Adam Smith speaks about with the hand of God. Or we've seen the church pull people out of seeking medical care and instead pray to God for miraculous healings or physical transformations. All these times that the church aligns itself with these other ends, these other powers, it's doing it out of a sense of inadequacy. They come from a longing for power, for influence, sometimes even from a desire to dominate. But the net of grace to catch the falling, that's the command to Simon Peter. That's the command to us, those who catch people. So you're climbing the proverbial ladder of success. And then perhaps because of some kind of behavior of your own, perhaps circumstances beyond your control, the job is lost, the relationship ends, the family casts you out. When you fall off that ladder, where do you land? On the hard asphalt of despair and defeat with all the others who have failed to make it to the pinnacle of life up the ladder of success? Or maybe there's a community or a group or an honor that you've always longed to have or feel, and yet you find that the fence around it is very high. No one's given you the key code to the entry gate. Or maybe there's a sign on the fence that says, "Keep out," because of who you are, or where you live, or your education, or who you love, and your family. When fences and gates keep you out, where do you go? The church, as Jesus creates it, is the net of grace to catch the falling. A community to surround and sustain, a group you don't have to impress. There's no initiation fee. There are no monthly dues. There's not a dress code. We got some water to wash wounds and dirt and sin and death. We've got a meal, but you don't need a reservation, and you don't have to worry about which fork to use for what course, because in fact, we actually just use our hands. There's no bouncer or gatekeeper at the door. Just a bunch of other folks who got caught in the net and who now see it as their calling to keep it mended and cleaned and cast and stretched. That's the church I want to be. But God knows that's not our public image. The church in broader society, and just this week, the Southern Baptist Convention didn't do us any favors in their stance on women in leadership in the church. The church is associated in broader society with predatory preachers, violent nationalism, with irrelevance, with superstition, with promoting its own power. Why, if that is your image of Christians in the church, would you ever want to have anything to do with that? So to be known as a community that catches, that nets people, it's going to take folks like you who know that your calling first as a disciple, as a follower of Jesus, is to catch those who are hurting, who are isolated, afraid, alone, angry, despairing, to catch them in the net of grace, unmerited favor, love, encouragement, and hope. Walk out of here today with your eyes open, and you're going to find a lot of folks trying to climb this ladder of a life they were told they should have. And it gets a lot scarier the higher you get. You're going to find a lot of fences, some with barbed wire on the top to keep people out of certain places where they don't belong. Friends, into that world where we go with a net. So let's see. Let's see what we catch.